Before we dive in, if you love stories where humanity turns fear into legend, where predators bow not to strength but to something far greater, hit that like button, subscribe, and drop a comment with what you would do if you stood face to face with a creature the galaxy calls unstoppable. Now, let's begin. The chamber of the Galactic Council was carved into orbit like a crown, a ring of light suspended above the blue-gray atmosphere of Velith Prime. Holographic banners flickered as senators and delegates filled their floating seats, voices overlapping in an anxious chorus. They were not accustomed to silence, but tonight the weight of it pressed down like an invisible hand. The holoscreen in the center projected a star map drenched in red. Entire sectors glowed like open wounds. A tremor rippled through the council floor as the projection zoomed in, revealing twisted metal hulls drifting through the void, wreckage of fleets that had dared to approach the Karthrath border. "They moved," rasped Councillor Vereen, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "For 200 years the predators stayed in their dark sector. Now," she gestured toward the hologram, "their migration paths are pointing directly toward inhabited systems. Core systems." Murmurs swelled. One delegate whispered something about planetary evacuation. Another muttered about fleet mobilization. No one spoke of negotiation. The Karthrath did not negotiate. They ended. Admiral Sol, this tapped the projection and the room dimmed around him. A new holo ignited, 12 warships burning silently in orbit, their hulls shredded as though torn apart by claws. This was the Varani's fleet. 3,000 lives. 8 minutes. Not one distress call. Our most advanced tracking arrays show no energy signatures. No warp trails. No heat. He paused, his thick fingers tightening around the edge of the console. They didn't fight a battle. They were devoured. The silence this time was absolute. Councillor Vereen rose, draped in her slate-colored robes. Her skin shimmered faintly under the lights, a reminder of her species' crystalline ancestry. "The predators are moving toward council territory. I propose full preemptive strikes and border lockdown. No negotiations. No risks. We erase their nests from the stars before they reach us." The chamber erupted like a struck hive. Dozens of voices, each laced with fear or fury. Some shouted agreement. Others whispered about suicide. The Karthrath weren't just predators, they were myth made real. It was said they hunted in silence, their intelligence alien and exact. Where fleets fell, even black holes seemed merciful in comparison. In the back row, Captain Elias Ward leaned against the railing, arms crossed, expression unreadable. He'd been summoned late, without ceremony, and had spent the last 10 minutes listening to creatures older than nations panic like children in a storm. His uniform bore the edges of field wear, creased, patched, honest. He didn't look like the polished ambassadors around him. He looked like someone who went where others didn't. When the speaker finally called for last remarks, Elias stepped forward. The whispering fractured. A few counselors recognized the human and stiffened, some with irritation, others with quiet curiosity. Humanity was still new to this grand stage, still treated like a reckless frontier species. He didn't bow. He didn't even smile. "You're afraid of them," he said, his voice cutting clean through the noise. "Good. That means you're not stupid. But fear isn't strategy." Councillor Vereen's crystalline eyes narrowed. "And what exactly do you suggest, Captain?" "That we offer them tea." Elias walked closer to the holomap, hands tucked behind his back. "Every report we have paints the Karthrath as monsters. And maybe they are. But nobody's talked to them. Nobody's even stepped on their soil and come back. All your data comes from ships that died." Admiral Sol disgrunted. "There's a reason for that." "Yeah," Elias said. "They sent fleets to talk with guns." The tension in the room thickened, a slow constriction of breath. Elias felt it and kept going. "Humans grew up on a world where everything had teeth. Lions, wolves, bears, apex predators. You know what we did?" He looked around at their stunned faces. "We learned how to make them our allies. Not by being fearless. By being clever. By walking in with our hands open before we clenched them." "Arrogance," Vereen hissed. "You compare wolves to the Karthrath?" Elias tilted his head slightly. "If they can bleed, if they can raise young, then they can be understood." The speaker cleared his throat, voice heavy and old. "Captain Ward, are you proposing a diplomatic expedition?" "I'm proposing I go," Elias said. "One scout ship. A small team. No fleets. If they're truly coming for war, you'll have your early warning. If they're not," he glanced back at the burning red map, "then maybe you won't have to burn half the galaxy to feel safe." For several seconds the council chamber held its breath. Counselor Varine slammed a crystalline hand against the railing. This is reckless. This is suicide. Humanity may have a talent for throwing itself into fire, but this council will not. Admiral Sol, this interrupted quietly. It's not the worst idea. That shocked her enough to stop. Sol, this stared at the wreckage hologram, then at Elias. If he dies, we lose nothing. If he comes back alive, we might learn something before it's too late. One by one, others nodded. Not out of faith, but out of fear, wearing the mask of pragmatism. They wanted time. A human scout was expendable. The speaker raised his hand and the chamber quieted. Captain Elias Ward. By majority vote, the Galactic Council authorizes your reconnaissance of Carthrath territory. No military escort. No interference. No guarantees of retrieval. Elias inclined his head, neither grateful nor surprised. Wouldn't want it any other way. As he turned to leave, Varine's voice followed him, cold as vacuum. When you're torn apart, human, remember that we warned you. Elias paused at the door, looking back just long enough for a faint, lopsided grin. Yeah, he said. But if I don't get torn apart, remember that too. The doors hissed shut behind him, cutting off the council's chatter. Outside, the starfield stretched in perfect silence. His ship waited in the docking bay, a black scout vessel built for slipping through the dark unnoticed. The mission file blinked in his retinal display. Objective, Carthrath sector reconnaissance. No contact protocol. Return unlikely. He stood there for a long moment, letting the cold air bite at his skin. Somewhere out there, in the places fleets dared not enter, something old and deadly was moving. Entire civilizations trembled. And yet here he was, a single man with a small ship and a stubborn conviction that monsters weren't always monsters. He climbed aboard, sealed the hatch, and engaged the thrusters. The stars elongated into streaks as the scout ship leapt toward darkness. The council chambers behind him were already descending into new arguments. But out here there was only the black. Only the Predator's sky waiting. And Elias Ward intended to walk straight into its heart. The stars thinned into sharp points as the scout ship dropped out of FTL, a ripple of light dispersing around its hull like a shiver. Elias Ward sat forward in the pilot's chair, one gloved hand braced against the armrest. The navigation display flickered, trying to map what lay ahead but failing to produce anything clean. It wasn't a planet, not in the familiar sense. It was a void with edges, black ridges rising from the darkness like the bones of something ancient that had died staring at the stars. The Carthrath home system had no sun in the traditional sense. A collapsed star burned faintly at its center, a shrunken ember giving just enough light to outline the skeletal terrain. The planet below was carved from obsidian stone, fractured and jagged, like a wound that never healed. A quiet beeping pulled his attention to the co-pilot's seat. Lieutenant Mason Reyes, lean and sharp-eyed, adjusted his headset. No communication signals. No atmospheric chatter. Just ambient growls on low frequencies. Whatever's down there isn't asleep. That's the point, Elias replied. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't need to. The silence of the cockpit magnified every syllable. Reyes frowned at the sensor readings. Thermal's erratic. It's like the ground itself is breathing. Elias leaned closer to the viewport. At first, the terrain looked dead, a graveyard of obsidian peaks. Then he saw it, movement. Whole stretches of stone shifted, unfurling like living shadows. It wasn't the mountain breathing. It was the Predators. The descent was slow, deliberate. Any sudden maneuver here could mean the difference between observation and being torn apart midair. The scout ship slid through layers of fog that smelled faintly of iron and ozone. As they breached the cloud layer, the world below revealed itself fully. Not the delicate constructs of birds or the geometric precision of hive creatures. These were sprawling, cavernous hollows clawed into the rock, each large enough to hold a battle tank. Veins of bioluminescent moss ran along the walls like pulsing arteries, illuminating creatures moving in and out of the shadows. Reyes swallowed audibly. Those are big. The Carthrath emerged in partial view as they moved closer to the ground. They moved low and fluid, six-limbed, each motion coiled with silent power. Their hides were armored, matte black that reflected almost no light, and their heads were shaped for killing, long, narrow, predatory. Even from the cockpit, Elias could see the intelligence in the way their gaze tracked the ship. They weren't startled. They weren't curious. They were measuring. Maintain altitude at 500 meters, Elias instructed. No weapon systems. Not even passive targeting. If they think we're prey, they'll watch. If they think we're a threat, they'll hunt. Reyes adjusted the stabilizers. The engines purred softly, just above the threshold of predator hearing. His knuckles were white on the controls. "Ward, they're following us." Below, shadows moved in synchrony. Packs glided along the edges of the ridges, matching the ship's course with unnerving precision. They didn't make a sound, but Elias felt it, a pressure like being locked in a room with a tiger that hadn't decided whether to pounce. "They're not following," Elias said. "They're herding." The realization snapped through Reyes. "You think they're apex predators. Predators don't let anything wander where it wants. We're in their territory now. Their rules." The ship circled above a plateau. It looked abandoned from orbit, but as the landing struts extended and dust plumed around the hull, Elias felt the air shift. There was something in the stillness, an expectation. They stepped out in full environmental suits, not armored, not bristling with weapons, just light protection and scanners strapped to their forearms. Elias had insisted on keeping their profile as non-threatening as possible. The wind here carried the tang of minerals and something deeper, something animal. The ground beneath their boots was rough and pitted, as if something massive had dragged claws through it repeatedly. The bioluminescent moss pulsed faintly with their footsteps, casting shifting shadows around them. Reyes swept his scanner slowly. No heat signatures within 30 meters. Past that, he hesitated. Everything. The predators weren't visible anymore, but they hadn't gone. Elias could feel their presence in the same way prey knows when a predator watches from the dark. He lowered his scanner and let the silence fill in the edges of the world. They moved cautiously toward the lip of a cavern that descended into the obsidian ridge. The entrance wasn't shaped by erosion. It was carved. Claw marks ran along the walls in patterns almost ceremonial, forming spiral paths down into the earth. Elias crouched, brushing his fingers against the surface. Warm. Still fresh. Whatever lived here wasn't gone. It was waiting. Rhea's voice broke softly behind him. "This is a bad idea." "Probably," Elias said. He didn't turn. A sound rolled through the cavern. Not a roar, not a growl, something deeper. A vibration that traveled through the rock and up their bones. It was a sound meant to be felt before it was heard. Elias straightened slowly. Then they saw it. A figure emerged from the cavern's shadow, massive and silent. An adult Carthrath. Its body flowed like smoke over stone, each step calculated. Its eyes caught the faint light of the moss, reflecting an eerie green. Behind it, smaller shapes shifted restlessly, juveniles perhaps or subordinates. The predator stopped 10 meters away, lowering its head but not in submission. It was the kind of posture that said, "You're still alive because I allow it." Reyes took an involuntary step back, hand twitching toward his sidearm. Elias raised a hand without looking at him. "Don't," he said quietly. The predator circled them once, tail sweeping low. Dust lifted into the air. Elias stood his ground. Every instinct screamed to move, to run, to shoot. But humans had done this before, with wolves, with lions, with things that didn't yet trust them but hadn't decided to kill either. The predator stopped directly in front of Elias. It exhaled slowly, hot air misting his faceplate. He could see the serration of its teeth from here, perfect weapons honed by centuries of survival. He held its gaze, unblinking. Reyes whispered, "Ward, if it lunges?" "It won't." Elias' voice was steady, almost calm. "Not yet." The predator's head tilted slightly, not as an animal does in confusion but as a being calculating an equation. It stepped closer, close enough that Elias could feel the tremor of its breathing against his chest plate. And then just as slowly, it turned away and melted back into the cavern. Elias exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. His pulse thundered in his ears. "They don't see us as prey," he said softly. "Not yet. But they also don't see us as anything they need." Reyes shook his head, staring at the dark mouth of the cavern. "That thing could have killed us without trying." "Exactly," Elias replied. He looked at the clawed spirals carved into the walls. "Which means it didn't. And that matters." Above them, the wind shifted, carrying a chorus of low, synchronized rumbles from the ridges around the plateau. More were gathering. Watching. Measuring. Elias looked up into the fog-thick sky, the predator's home pressing down on them like the weight of an ocean. They had stepped into the lion's den, and the lion hadn't decided whether to welcome or devour them. He adjusted his scanner and murmured, half to Reyes, half to the darkness itself, "Let's find out which way it leans." The air was colder near the cavern floor, heavy with the scent of iron and dust. Elias moved slowly, careful to place each step on the ridged obsidian so it echoed less. The bioluminescent veins in the walls pulsed with a steady rhythm, like a heartbeat buried in stone. Reyes followed a step behind, his breath shallow, the soft hum of the scanner the only mechanical sound between them. They had descended into the heart of the predator's nest. The cavern opened wider as they moved deeper. Along the walls, massive claw marks ran in looping arcs, deliberate, almost ritualistic. It wasn't chaos, it was culture. The Karthrath hadn't just built a den, they had carved their identity into the rock. A low, rhythmic sound vibrated through the floor, as if something larger than life was breathing beneath their feet. Then they saw it. In the dim light, near a jagged ridge, a small shape trembled weakly. A Karthrath cub, its skin a softer shade of charcoal, its limbs thin, movements sluggish. A deep gash split its flank, wet with a dark fluid that shimmered like oil. Around it, several adults stood at the edges of the shadows, silent and still. Their glowing green eyes tracked every move Elias made. Rhea's whisper cracked the air. "We shouldn't be here." Elias didn't look back. He crouched slowly, lowering himself to the cub's level. The adults shifted their weight but didn't advance. Their tails moved in slow, deliberate sweeps, warning signals, not immediate attack. Elias extended one gloved hand, palm open, letting the scent from his suit carry. The cub shuddered and tried to growl, but the sound came out as a weak rasp. Its breathing was shallow, jagged. It was in pain, maybe dying. Elias knew that sound. He'd heard it in forests on Earth, on battlefields, on dying ships. Life clinging to itself with the last strands it had. "Elias," Reyes hissed. "You're going to get us killed." Elias didn't answer. He reached slowly into the med compartment strapped to his belt. No weapons, only a compact thermal pack. He cracked the seal and a wave of soft heat spread through the air. The predators reacted immediately, tails stiffened, claws flexed. The temperature had changed in their den and that mattered. He set the pack gently against the cub's flank, not pressing, just offering. For a moment nothing happened. Then the cub made a faint, broken sound, a sigh, a surrender, and its small body leaned toward the heat. The largest of the adults moved forward. Its body was a living wall of muscle and armor, each step silent. Reyes stiffened, hand inching toward his sidearm again, but Elias raised a hand. The predator lowered its massive head until its jaws hovered a breath from Elias's arm. Its breath fogged the surface of his visor, a heat far more primal than the pack he carried. One movement, one reflex and he'd be gone. But it didn't strike. Its nostrils flared. It listened to the cub's shallow breaths. The cub shifted closer to Elias's hand. The alpha's eyes flicked to him, slow and deliberate, as if testing something ancient and instinctive. Trust wasn't offered. It was earned or forced. Elias whispered, "It's just heat. That's all." His voice was calm, steady, even though his pulse pounded like a war drum in his chest. Reyes's scanner blinked a soft green warning. "Elias, that thing's heart rate just spiked. They're all synced to it. If it attacks, they all attack." The alpha leaned closer. Elias didn't flinch. Then, in a movement so precise it could have been rehearsed, the predator lowered its head and pressed its snout near the cub's flank. Its massive frame relaxed fractionally when the cub exhaled against the warmth. Outside, the pack let out a sound unlike any recorded growl, a low, rippling hum that filled the cavern, layered and deep. It wasn't aggression. It was acknowledgement. The Galactic Council was watching everything from orbit through their ship's uplink. Billions of viewers across hundreds of worlds were seeing a human kneel beside the galaxy's most feared predator and keep breathing. In the council chamber light years away, no one spoke. Elias felt the weight of those invisible eyes but focused only on the creature before him. His fingers hovered an inch above the cub's rough hide. Slowly, carefully he let them rest against it. The cub didn't pull away. It shuddered once, then fell still, breathing a little easier. Reyes exhaled a sound halfway between disbelief and terror. "You're touching it." "Yeah," Elias said softly. "I am." For a moment, everything held still. The air, the predators, the ship above, the galaxy itself. Then the alpha turned its head to face Elias fully. The green light of its eyes caught every plane of his visor. It didn't speak in words. It didn't need to. Its gaze carried a silent understanding. He had crossed a line no other being had dared. A soft, rhythmic vibration began to roll through the cavern again, stronger than before. This time it wasn't a warning. It was a chorus. One by one, the predators around them lowered their heads slightly, tails lowering in a subtle but unmistakable gesture. Not submission. Recognition. Elias didn't smile. He didn't dare. But something in his chest shifted, a spark, quiet and alive. This wasn't victory. It was something far more dangerous. The cub pressed closer, nestling weakly against his knee. The alpha moved with deliberate slowness, lowering itself beside them. The proximity would have frozen any other soldier in terror, but Elias didn't move. He let the moment breathe. Reyes muttered, "The council's losing its mind right now." "They should be," Elias replied. Everything they thought they knew just cracked. The alpha released a single, low sound, almost like a breath drawn through stone. It wasn't language, but Elias felt its weight settle into the room. The predators had decided not to kill him. That was the first threat. Whether it held or snapped would depend on everything that followed. Above them, a faint pulse from the ship indicated that transmissions were already spreading. Fear was turning into something else. Curiosity. Disbelief. Hope. Elias rose slowly, careful not to break the fragile balance. The cub leaned against his leg, its small frame warming against the thermal pack. The alpha watched without blinking. "We keep this quiet," Reyes muttered. "We don't want to spook them." Elias shook his head. "They already know we're here. Quiet isn't what matters. Trust is." The alpha stood, looming over him like a moving wall of night. Then it did something no record in council archives had ever captured. It turned its back to him and padded deeper into the cavern. A gesture not of threat, but of permission. Reyes stared after it, eyes wide. "I can't believe that just happened." Elias crouched again, fingers brushing lightly against the cub's hide. "Believe it," he said quietly. "Because the galaxy will." Outside, in the fog beyond the cavern mouth, more predators were gathering. The night hummed with their presence, a storm waiting to break. Elias didn't know if he'd just saved his life or signed his own death warrant. But as the cub settled against the warmth, he understood one thing with dangerous clarity. The line between fear and reverence was already starting to blur. The night sky over the predator world fractured with distant light, like silent lightning crawling across the upper atmosphere. Elias stood at the edge of the plateau where they had first landed, the cub pressed against his leg, its breathing now steady and warm. The alpha loomed nearby, a shadow bigger than any man, head raised toward the horizon. Something was wrong. The predators felt it first. Their tails stiffened. Their low, rolling hum shifted pitch. Reyes jogged up the slope, scanner flickering red. "Elias," he said, voice tight, "we've got incoming." Not predators. Ships. Multiple warp signatures just outside the gravity well. Elias already knew. The alpha had moved before the first ping reached their instruments. Its gaze locked on the dark sky with a precision that felt more like strategy than instinct. Reyes brought the display up between them. Dozens of crimson dots clustered along a single vector. "Draxon Syndicate," he muttered. "Pirates, slavers, scavengers, they'll take anything they can gut. Council chatter says they intercepted the uplink. They know what's here." Elias's jaw tightened. "They're not here for us. They're here for the predators." The Draxon ships dropped out of warp with a predatory grace that almost mirrored the creatures below. Heavy black hulls, spike-shaped, with broad nets designed for live captures. They didn't fire. They descended in silence, confident no one would challenge them here. The alpha turned its head to Elias. That silent, unreadable gaze met his, and for the first time he recognized the weight behind it. It wasn't curiosity anymore. It was expectation. "They're going to hunt them," Reyes said. "They'll cage them, weaponize them. They've done it before with lesser species. If the Draxon get them off-world, there won't be a Karthrath left free by the end of the cycle." Elias didn't answer. He stepped forward, the cub padding after him instinctively. The predators on the ridges shifted as if pulled by an invisible thread. The alpha raised its head high and let out a single roar, deep and resonant, vibrating through the rock beneath their feet. The sound tore through the night, and every predator answered. It was the first time Elias truly understood the scale of them. Hundreds, maybe thousands. Shapes moving across the black ridges like the tide. The Draxon ships broke formation. Nets glimmered in the atmosphere as their engines burned low, deploying hunter drones into the fog. These weren't exploratory maneuvers. This was a harvest. Reyes' hand hovered over the sidearm he wasn't supposed to use. "We should call the council," he said, though the hopelessness in his voice gave away how pointless that was. The nearest response fleet was days away. Elias watched the predators gathering below. Their formation wasn't random. It was coordinated. The alpha's movements rippled outward through the packs like an unspoken language. "They're not running," Elias said. "They can't beat ships," Reyes snapped. "No," Elias agreed. "But maybe they don't have to." The lead Draxon craft swept low over the plateau, engines screaming. Predators leapt at it, not aimlessly but in arcs calculated to drive it off its trajectory. Their claws struck hull plating, sparks trailing through the night. One of the drones clipped a predator's flank. The creature fell but the rest closed ranks around it like soldiers. Elias felt the ground shake beneath him. The Alpha stepped forward and lowered its massive head toward him. For a heartbeat, man and beast stood inches apart. Then the Alpha turned its gaze skyward. "You can't be serious," Reyes said. Elias was already moving. "We came here to learn what they are. We found it. They're not just predators." He glanced back at the cub still pressed to his leg. "They're protectors." The ship's comm crackled, static bleeding through. "The Council's emergency channel." Varine's voice, clipped and sharp, filled the air. "Captain Ward. We have Syndicate ships entering Predator territory. You are to evacuate immediately. Do not engage. Repeat. Do not." Elias cut the channel. The Council's fear had built this galaxy. It wasn't going to save it. Reyes stared at him like he'd lost his mind. "Elias, they have cannons. We have a scout ship with a half-charged shield grid and 2 rifles. We're not going to outgun them," Elias said. "But we can make sure they don't get what they came for." The Alpha's roar split the sky again, louder this time, a sound so deep it shook the hulls of the descending ships. The Predators surged forward in a wave of coordinated fury. Draxon drones opened fire, plasma bursts flaring against the obsidian ground, but the Predators moved like smoke, striking from angles the machines couldn't track fast enough. Elias sprinted to the ship. Reyes followed, cursing under his breath. They powered the engines but left the shields down, appearing less of a threat, a trick Elias hoped would buy them seconds they didn't have. "Lock external comms to broadcast," Elias ordered. "Put me through to their leader." Reyes frowned but obeyed. The Draxon flagship appeared on the screen, a grotesque bridge of rusted steel and bones from half a dozen worlds. A figure leaned into view, reptilian, its eyes like carved amber. "A human," it hissed. "How convenient. You'll make a fine bargaining chip while we take our prizes." Elias leaned toward the mic. "You should leave." The creature's laughter was static and smoke. "Do you know what a Karthrath fetches on the black markets, little man?" Elias's reply was quiet. "Do you know what happens when you try to cage something that doesn't fear you?" The Alpha slammed into the side of the nearest Draxon ship, claws digging into metal, twisting its trajectory midair. Other Predators swarmed below, striking drones in packs, moving with frightening precision. It wasn't chaos. It was war. The Draxon commander's grin faltered. "What are you?" "Watching," Elias said. "You're not hunting them. You're standing between them and their young." Reyes triggered the ship's thrusters, cutting through the fog to draw the attackers closer. Drones swarmed after them just as planned. The Alpha turned its head sharply, signaling its kind. From the ridges, the Predators surged, colliding with the Draxon flank in perfect synchronization. For every drone that fired, 2 were pulled down. For every ship that dove lower, the Alpha's pack forced it higher. The Syndicate came expecting beasts. What they found was a force that defended its own with terrifying clarity. Elias kept the ship just out of reach, baiting the Draxon flagship into lowering its nets. The Alpha followed the signal, leaping like a living storm. Claws tore through the net arrays, rending metal like fabric. One ship spiraled into the ridge and vanished in a fireball. The commander's voice returned, a hiss now strained. "What are you?" Elias's voice was steady. "I'm human. We make friends with monsters." The flagship shuddered as another Predator slammed into its undercarriage. Alarms howled across the Draxon fleet. What was meant to be a hunt was becoming a rout. The Predators didn't chase the retreating ships beyond their sky. They stopped where their land ended. As the last Syndicate vessel jumped to warp, the packs returned to the ridges, their breathing heavy, their formation intact. Not a single cub had been taken. Reyes sank into the pilot's chair, his breath shaking. "We just fought with them." Elias stepped outside, the cub following him, and looked out at the Predators gathered beneath the fading light. The Alpha stood at the front of the pack, watching him. "They didn't fight for us," Elias said quietly. "We fought for the same thing." The Alpha lowered its massive head until their gazes aligned. In that stillness, in the silence after war, something solidified, not spoken, not signed, but understood. The Council had feared these creatures as a force of destruction. But tonight they had seen them as something else entirely. Elias reached down, brushing his hand lightly against the cub's head. Overhead, the night sky was clear again, but the weight of what had just happened hung like gravity. It wasn't just survival anymore. It was alliance. And the galaxy was already watching. The council chamber was built to intimidate. Every surface gleamed in cold light, every angle sharpened to make those who stood beneath its vaulted ceiling feel smaller than the weight of its judgment. Rows of alien delegates filled the ascending tiers, their robes stiff, their expressions masked behind ceremonial lenses. Elias Ward walked into that light with his shoulders square, the cup pressed against his leg, its fur bristling softly as the murmur of hundreds of species rippled across the hall. Behind him, the Alpha moved like a shadow given form, each step deliberate, silent, and impossibly graceful for something so large. The council guards tensed instinctively. The predators were not supposed to set foot here. Not in the Hall of Sentience. Not in the chamber where entire civilizations had been condemned for far less. Vereen rose from the central dais, silver robes glinting under the suspended beams of light. Her species, the Kytheri, were famed for their composure, but her throat ridges tightened as she spoke. "Captain Ward," she said evenly, "you were ordered to observe. You were not authorized to intervene in an intergalactic conflict, nor to bring an unclassified apex predator into a restricted seat of power." Elias's boots echoed in the silence. "If we hadn't intervened," he said, "there wouldn't be a predator species left to stand trial here. The Draxan would have slaughtered or caged them all." A wave of uneasy murmurs rippled through the chamber. Vereen's eyes narrowed. The Karthrath have been classified as a Tier 7 threat for centuries. Their instinct is to kill. Their presence here is not just illegal, it is dangerous. Elias stepped aside. The cub moved forward, blinking curiously at the vast chamber. Its claws clicked softly on the marble floor. It tilted its head toward the council seats, not with the predatory stillness they expected, but with something almost childlike. The Alpha remained still, massive and calm, its breath steady and unthreatening. The contrast was undeniable. Elias met Vereen's gaze. "You're afraid of something you've never actually seen." Delegate Kor from the Vethan block slammed a clawed hand on his desk. "They are killers," he barked. "My world lost 3 colonies to their kind 200 years ago." The Alpha's head turned, its golden eyes locking on him, not aggressive, just sharp, aware. Kor's voice faltered. Reyes, standing at Elias's flank, stepped forward. "And how many of those colonies trespassed into their breeding grounds?" he asked, his voice low but cutting through the noise. "How many of those reports tell the whole story?" The room quieted. Elias let the silence work for him. He'd spent his career on battlefields, where silence meant a decision was being made. He knew this feeling well. He activated the hollow projector embedded in his wristband. The chamber filled with light. The recording from the night of the attack unfolded in the air for all to see. Draxan ships descending, nets glimmering, predators standing their ground, not as hunters but as defenders. Then came the image that no council member could look away from, the cub pressing itself against Elias as the Alpha turned to shield it from a plasma burst. Not attacking. Protecting. "The Syndicate came to take them," Elias said, voice steady. "They stood between death and their young. And when we stood with them, they stood with us." A low hum rose among the delegates, fractured and uncertain. These were leaders of empires built on policy and fear, not courage. For most of them, the Karthrath were legends, creatures whispered about, not witnessed. Vereen's expression barely shifted, but her voice lost some of its iron edge. "One night does not erase centuries of blood." "Then stop pretending the blood was only theirs," Elias replied. Reyes glanced sideways at him, half expecting an arrest order to follow. But none came. The chamber was listening now. Elias drew in a breath. "For centuries we've built this council around fear. Fear of what's outside. Fear of what can't be controlled. We call it protection. But it's cowardice dressed as order. The Karthrath didn't need our permission to survive. They needed our understanding to stop being treated like monsters." The Alpha stepped forward then, slow and deliberate, until it stood at Elias's side. The chamber guards raised their weapons. Vereen lifted a hand. "Stand down," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Every blaster lowered. The Alpha lowered its head, not a bow, not submission, but something that felt like acknowledgement. Its gaze swept across the council, its breath warm against the cold chamber air. In that moment, even the most hardened delegates couldn't deny what they were seeing. It wasn't a beast. It was something older, proud, and far from the mindless predator they'd imagined. Kor's voice was rough now, less certain. "What happens when their wrath turns on us again?" Elias answered without hesitation. "Then we do what we should have done from the beginning. We talk before we shoot." We listen before we cage. Because what I saw that night wasn't an apex predator. He placed his hand lightly on the cub's head. It was apparent. The chamber stilled. The council didn't move in one voice, they never did, but murmurs shifted from fear to calculation to something that felt like possibility. Varine's gaze flicked to the Alpha, then to Elias. If we remove them from the threat registry, she said slowly, we open the council to backlash from half the sectors. Entire militaries have been built on the premise that these creatures are nightmares. Then maybe it's time the galaxy stops waking up in fear, Elias said. The cub climbed onto his boot, curling its tail around his leg like it had the night of the attack. The simple gesture broke something unspoken in the room. Predators didn't do that. Beasts didn't seek comfort. Varine stepped down from the dais. The act itself was rare. Her eyes scanned the Alpha with a mixture of caution and something bordering on respect. You forced the council into a choice, she said. Elias inclined his head. Good. That's how change starts. She stood in silence for a heartbeat too long. Then, softly but clearly she said, I will move to reclassify the Karthrath. Not as a threat. As a people. The words struck the chamber like thunder. Gasps echoed across the tiers. Some shouted in outrage. Others fell silent, understanding the weight of what had just been set in motion. It wasn't approval, not yet. But it was enough. The tide had shifted. The Alpha gave a low, resonant sound, not the roar of war but something gentler, older, a sound like deep earth stirring. Elias didn't know its meaning. But the cub pressed closer and that was enough. Outside the chamber, in the orbital lanes above the capital world, ships that once feared the predator world now hovered in uncertain quiet. What had begun as a hunt had become an alliance that no fleet could unmake. Reyes exhaled, breaking the silence at last. You just rewrote council law with a cub and a speech. Elias let out a quiet laugh. No. They rewrote it themselves. We just finally listened. The Alpha raised its head one last time, golden eyes reflecting the council's fractured light. Elias met its gaze, a silent promise passing between them. This wasn't the end of the story. This was the beginning of a new one. One where the galaxy's most feared predator stood not in chains, but at humanity's side. And for the first time in centuries the council chamber didn't echo with fear. It echoed with something far rarer.